In France, England and the Low Countries, black hoods with veils at the back were worn over linen undercaps that allowed the front hair, parted in the middle, to be shown. These hoods became more complex and structured over time. Unique to England was the gable or English hood, a wired headdress shaped like the gable of a house. Originally a simple pointed hood with decorated side panels called lappets and a veil at the back. Over time the gable hood became a complex construction, stiffened with buckram with a box-shaped back and two tube-shaped hanging veils at 90-degree angles. The hanging veils and lappets could be pinned up in a variety of ways to make complex headdresses. This is Mary Wotton wearing a gable hood with pinned up lappets and a hanging veil. This is a portrait of Catherine of Aragon, painted circa 1525. Queen Catherine wears the gable headdress with the lappets turned up. Note the length of the front jewel portion. In its early form, this extended below the chin. In later years, it was a chin length or higher. Note also that the black drape in the back hangs down. In later hoods, one or both tails were turned up and pinned to the top of the bonnet. This is a sketch from 1540. It includes a rare view of the back of this headdress, which raises some interesting questions. The back appears to contain structural elements. The veil does not appear to be cast over the back of the headdress, but affixed or sewn to it in some way. This is Margaret, Marchioness of Dorset, Elizabeth I's godmother. The sketch was probably done at the time of Elizabeth's christening. This is Lady Elliot, painted by Hans Holbein in 1532. The starchy headdress Lady Elliot wears seems to have been of a design baffling even to Holbein, probably because of the way in which it prevents that definition of the back of the head, which allows the face to jut into the picture space convincingly. The first intimations of the emerging Tudor style can be seen in the picture of Margaret Beaufort, painted in 1503. She is wearing a long veil, a common style of headdress for the time, but the front section is heavily starched and stiffened into a point. For the next decade, the structure of the gable hood did not change significantly from the headdress worn by Queen Catherine. The jewelled billements vary widely in design and colour, as does the embroidery of the lappets and the stylish pinning, shaping and draping of the bulky hood fabric, but the construction and shape of the English hood remains constant throughout. As the 1530s progressed, the sides of the English hood became shorter. The billements ended above the jaw rather than at the chin line, and the side lappets and veil were pinned up. A new lighter form of headwear began to make an appearance in the 1530s, worn mostly by younger women. This hood combined the square shape of the gable hood with the flattering, less bulky silhouette of the emerging French hood. In this picture, Anne is shown wearing such a hood, which can be called a transitional English hood, for lack of a better word. It lays flat across the top and bends down at the sides, creating a square profile. This style of hood coexisted with the older gable variety. The more family sketch, as you can see, created in 1528, provides a snapshot of women of different ages wearing different headwear. In actuality, the square-shaped hood had much in common with the newly emerging fashion that was soon to replace the gable hood, the French hood. A simple rounded hood of the early years of the century evolved into the French hood, Popular in both France and England, its arched shape set further back on the head and displayed the front hair, which was parted in the centre and pinned up in braids or twists under the veil. The origins of the French hood can be seen in portraits of Anne of Brittany in the early 1500s. The French hood is characterised by a rounded shape contrasted with the angular English or gable hood. It is worn over a cuff and has a black veil attached to the back. Unlike the more conservative gable hood, it displays the front part of the hair. The French hood had its origins in, you guessed it, France. A painting of a young Catherine of Aragon, painted around 1510 to 1520, shows its origins. A veil similar to that worn on an English gable hood, but with a wired front, which stiffened it into a round shape rather than a pointed top. The golden coloured pleated band showing at the front of her veil remained an integral part of the French hood for the next 2 decades, but the construction, shape and silhouette of the rest changed dramatically. Although associated with Anne Boleyn, it was probably introduced to the English court by Mary Tudor, Queen of France, who is depicted wearing one in a wedding portrait from around 1516. However, English women at the time mostly wore the gable hood, and so it did not achieve much popularity in England until the 1530s. In September 1537, Honor Grenville, Viscountess Lisle, a Tudor noblewoman, requested from the merchant William Le Gras many hats such as the ladies wear in France, for now the ladies here follow the French fashion. Despite its growth and popularity, the then Queen Jane Seymour forbade her ladies from wearing the French hood in favour of the gable or English hood, known as billements by the people of the time. These decorative jewelled and pearled edges were, though not essential, a fashionable addition to a plain French hood. Billements sometimes matched the jewelled edging of a gown. This portrait of Queen Elizabeth as a young girl, painted in 1545, shows her wearing a French hood of the same fabric as her gown. The majority of French hoods were black satin, taffeta or velvet, with at most an edging of white fabric along the top or bottom. A black veil was attached to the inside of the hood where it fell to below the shoulders. When the French hood first appeared in portraits of the nobility, its shape was not radically dissimilar to that of the transitional English hood. It was pretty much the same shape, but wired into a round rather than square silhouette. It's sort of an optical illusion, but the hood actually sits flat against the head. Sculpture, especially funeral sculpture, provides the best visual evidence of French hood construction. As it gained in popularity, the shape of the French hood evolved. The tips of the hood narrowed into points and the side curves grew more pronounced, more squared. The fashionable variety in French hoods was much greater than that of the gable hood. Not only the fabric and decoration of French hoods differed from piece to piece, but the shape of the wired base could be changed as well to create different profiles. Queen Mary I, for instance, wore a French hood with a round profile when younger, but in later years favoured one with a flatter, square top. Catherine Howard, King Henry VIII's fifth wife, is painted in a late Tudor 1540s French hood, which looks quite different from the hood worn by Anne Boleyn. It is white and has a much curvier shape. It shows a strap underneath Catherine's chin to keep the hood in place. By the time Queen Elizabeth was firmly upon the throne of England, the headwear of the well-to-do and the nobility had changed dramatically. The hood, now sometimes referred entirely as a habiliment, as well as a French hood, shrank even more in the 1560s and 1570s into a delicate arrangement of lace, jewellery, pearls and fabric placed far back on the crown of the head. The jewel decoration grew in size and complexity, while the body of the hood is mostly hidden by bouffant hair and the decorative edges. Head coverings during the 16th century ranged from the simple to the complex. The simplest, which was worn throughout the 16th century and well into the 17th, was the coif, coif. I will be pronouncing it coif. It's quite simply a close-fitting cap made of a light fabric, usually white or naturally coloured linen or silk for the nobility. It was worn for reasons headwear has been worn for centuries: warmth, protection from the elements, and to keep the hair out of the face. But its most important functions during this time: respectability for more skilled and affluent people, for decoration. In this picture, you can see the front edge of Anne Boleyn's coif is far back on the crown, with tabs on either side coming forward past the jawline. The front edge is also wired with a heavy wire, presumably to keep its shape and to keep it on the head. There is also another head covering worn under the coif, visible along the front, which seems to be a band of fabric holding back hair. Two metal clips are seen on either side to aid in keeping an English hood on the head. Straps sewn into the underside of the cheek pieces of the hood. When slipped underneath, these clips would keep the hood on quite firmly and invisibly. The line of the coif follows quite closely the line of the gable and transitional hoods worn at the time, a good indication that this was worn underneath the hood as well as by itself. As headwear became more revealing, coifs became more and more visible and more popular as a fashionable item of headwear, especially among the middle classes and working women. Here you can see a sketch of London gentlewomen drawn in 1570. It is one of the best examples we have of coifs worn during this decade. This picture also illustrates the variety in styles and head coverings to be found in one place and one moment in time. Although years later than the coif sketched by Holbein, this painting of Catherine Grey has some similarities to the coif worn by Anne Boleyn. The front top rests further back on the crown. The back is not seen, but one can guess that it is shaped by a seam running down the back of the head and or gathered at the base of the neck. An atifet is a heart-shaped headdress with a point that dips over the forehead, worn by European women in the 16th and 17th centuries. It was first worn by Catherine de' Medici and Mary Queen of Scots. The atifet originated in France and was later also worn in countries such as England, Scotland and Czechoslovakia. Typically, the front of the atifet was held in shape by a wire frame. It dipped to a point over the forehead and then curved up and back in an arc on both sides. Usually made of silk or linen and trimmed with lace or pearls. It was normally white, although there was also a black variant known as a widow's hood. This is where the term widow's peak, a V-shaped growth of hair towards the centre of the forehead, comes from. Snoods are a very popular item at Renaissance fairs. Most of them are crocheted, some are beaded. Some tie off with a string, while others have elastic in the band to keep the snood on the head. Snoods are convenient, they keep the hair out of the face and off the neck. Unfortunately, the snoods you usually see at Renaissance fairs aren't themselves authentic. Crochet wasn't invented until the 17th century. Period hairnets were made by knotting thread or cord together, rather like fishing nets, and the thread or cord was much finer than crochet netting. Could be made of fine linen, silk or netting. Some of these head coverings allow the hair to hang free beneath, while others contain the hair. The Elizabethan gentlewomen didn't wear a snood per se. They did wear something very similar, which was called a caul, a small bag pinned over a bun and the hair at the back of the head. The balzo was a headdress worn by noblewomen of Italy in the 1530s. It was donut-shaped but appeared turban-like from the front, though it was generally worn further back from the forehead, exposing the hair. To wear this headdress, the hairline was often plucked. Though mostly known as a woman's headdress, there is also evidence of men wearing it. A flat cap is a rounded cap with a small stiff brim in front. The hat is also known in Scotland as a bunnet. A 1571 Act of the English Parliament was enacted to stimulate domestic wool consumption, and general trade decreed that on Sundays and holidays, all males over 6 years of age, except for the nobility and persons of degree, were to wear woolen caps or pay a fine of 3 farthings per day. Men and women's hats were interchangeable, flat, black and sometimes with a feather and some jewels depending on their status. Cuffs would sometimes peek through the front and sides. A cap and bells or a fool's cap featured horns, bells, asses' ears, asses' tails often curling forward, ill faces and coxcombs. They were worn by court jesters or fools. Other forms of fool's caps in England were shaped like a monk's cowl with ass's ears, or a high-pointed cap covered with bells, or a round cap with an imposing feather. A stouchlen is made up of several layers: the undercuff, then the padded cap, and then the covering, which makes up the whole headdress. It was favoured by Henry VIII's fourth wife, Anne of Cleves. Starting as early as 1480, the four-cornered cap appears on the heads of various men such as clergymen, senators, lord mayors and doctors. Some versions had extensions that came down to cover the ears, and some had that extension tied up on top of the head, while others were symmetrical all the way around with no extension at all. The tall hat was first worn by men starting around the 1570s, mostly in England, the Low Countries and Spain. Women soon adopted the style when worn with high-necked doublet-style bodices. A bonne grace was a velvet-covered headdress stiffened with buckram. It was favoured by Elizabeth I in the early years of her reign. Straw hats seem to have been worn mainly by workers labouring outdoors. Most hairstyles were influenced by Queen Elizabeth. Her hair colour was emulated by many of the nobility, as was the fair hair ideal for a woman. An upper-class Elizabethan woman might even dye her hair with a mixture of saffron, cumin seeds and oil. Fashion dictated that hair was combed away from the forehead. Women would pluck the hairs from around their hairline and completely remove their eyebrows by plucking or shaving, as a high forehead was fashionable. One reason for the popularity of the bare forehead was that women were using corrosive hair dyes, as well as lead-based powder that was intended to whiten their complexion and cover blemishes. Periwigs were made of curls or frizzed hair styled into tiny waves. They were built into an array of shapes, often symmetrical. Frizzed hair was favoured by Queen Elizabeth and therefore followed by the ladies of the court. Tudor and Elizabethan hairstyles for men were just as important as they were for women. The length of hair varied during the Elizabethan era. It started as short cropped hairstyles and increased in length during the period. A lot of time was spent grooming the hair, especially when it was fashionable to sport a longer length. Long hair was required to be curly. Men had their hair curled with hot irons, and to keep the hair in place, wax or gum was applied. And this concludes the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please click the like button, give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe for future videos. Thank you.